DeSando.
Classics, let's go to the movies and share some popcorn, soda pop with our friends. Turn off our cell phones and get away. Night or day, it's John DeSando on the radio.
Cinema Classics is produced by John DeSando. It airs Thursday at 8:01 p.m. on WCBE 90.5 FM. Listen to shows and read reviews online at WCBE.org.
I'm John DeSando.
And I'm Kevin Carr.
And this is Cinema Classics.
Ooh, and it's spooky.
And listen, we're talking a classic conjunction here. We love this, taking the present, going to the past.
Yeah.
We're talking half a century of influence.
I know, isn't it kind of crazy? The Exorcist has turned 50.
Wow. And now we have Exorcist. What do we call this?
The Exorcist
Believer, right?
Believer, not
Right.
Believer. It has nothing to do with Justin Bieber.
And so it's there's a bunch of stuff that comes in between. Probably not worth it. I just want to mention that perhaps later on I can tell you that I saw the Pope's Exorcist.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You haven't seen that.
I have. Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, good. So we can chat a little
Yeah,
bit
I
about
have
that.
mixed feelings about
Yeah,
that.
and I do too.
Yeah.
So that's good. All right, but we do have Exorcist Believer.
Mhm.
It's been getting mixed reviews as far as I can tell.
There's some good reviews. As more reviews rolled out, I would say it went from mixed down to bad.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like something like 24% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I know that's not a reliable standard.
yeah.
It's an up and down rating.
Yeah, right. I get a feel for it. I look at IMDb. I get a feel for it.
Yeah.
I can see what the critics are. I can see what the audience is. So for me, you see everything. For me, I don't want to see everything. And so I need something to start with.
Yeah.
I need somebody to say, well, it is worth watching or it isn't. And that's what's good about criticism, I think. And as long as you don't read them all before you see it and all that. Whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we have Exorcist, The Believer.
It's The Exorcist,
The Exorcist.
Believer.
Believer, right.
You always have to get these, or they could just call it like they did with the Halloween franchise and just call it Exorcist all over again, you know?
Well, I have to disclose to you.
Yeah.
I'm a Georgetown grad,
Okay.
and I used to court on the big steps that don't appear anymore.
Yeah.
Not in this film, but in the earlier one, the one in Georgetown down on M Street. And I'm heavily influenced by my Catholic background.
Okay.
So this one of the reasons I just grab onto this to do
You're
it.
primed fruit for the picking.
Oh, I really am, yeah. And so everything that happens in these movies is meaningful for me. Now, how about you? You're not in any way related.
I'm not related
Yeah.
in any way to Georgetown or, but this one doesn't even take
No,
place. It takes place in Georgia, in a Georgia town,
That's
but
right.
not Georgetown. And weirdly enough, it also kind of jettisons all of the Catholic stuff in a lot of
Now,
ways.
Kev, I'm wondering if that isn't a weakness of it.
Well, my general opinion of this movie is it tries some neat things,
Yes.
and I don't think any of them really land. You know, and one of them is jettisoning all of the Catholic, all the Catholic rituals and foundations to that. And that's not me, pitching for the Catholic Church. I'm not here to represent the Vatican.
No.
But then they kind of open it up and they say, which is true, most cultures and religions have
Yes.
some sort of demon vanquishing type of
Yes.
rituals. And so that's kind of a neat approach, but then it just turns into this weird hodgepodge.
Well, all right. One of the weaknesses I think of the movie, and actually I enjoyed it, but one of the weaknesses is having Ann Dowd perform the exorcism as a former.
As a former nun.
No, well, I mean, she was going to be a nun, was it? Was she a former nun?
Yeah, she
something
was,
like that.
yeah.
But she's a civilian, maybe even
Yeah.
a nurse or whatever.
Well, and then they bring in this like the Southern preacher from a Protestant religion, and and then I'm sorry, it just with the accent, it just sounds cheesy at that point.
I thought he was a goner. I mean, when he came in, I thought he would be.
Well, and that's the thing. So it's like I get the idea of trying to expand it outside of
A
Catholicism.
communal experience.
And I've always said it's weird with movies because Hollywood is very secular nowadays. It used to not be, but it is now. Until you have an exorcism movie and then everyone buys Jesus. But there's a huge difference between Father Marin and Father Karras in that room with Reagan McNeil doing the incantations. and this ragtag group of people from a bunch of things kind of just throwing stuff against the wall, and it seems almost made up. It's sort of like when you're a kid and you're like, let's build a car, and of course you don't get anywhere near a car because you don't know how it works and you're not sophisticated enough to make it happen.
One of the things I liked about this actually is that I thought that there was more about the victims than we had in the original. Original we had Linda Blair, whatever, right?
Yeah. Well,
and this one you have the teenage girls.
Yeah, there's two of them. That's the other thing they do that's different. They bring in two possessed.
And I thought that there was more consideration of them as teens, so that you could make the figurative jump between what was happening here and actually as teenagers. I like to make the comment that you can't understand teenagers anyway.
Well, yeah.
They're doing all the jargon. What's the difference, right? These kids come back.
Yeah.
They're possessed.
Well, and it's a different way of looking at it through the 2003 lens, or the 2023 lens, and the 1970s.
Yes.
And when you go back to how they put together, how they approached Reagan was just a victim in the first film. I mean, she was this sweet, nice, cute little, like, 12-year-old girl. There was no problems with her at all, and she loved her mom, and she was okay with her parents being divorced. I mean, she was kind of this paper doll in a lot of ways, and then all this stuff, crazy stuff happens to her, and you're meant to empathize with her for kind of having the perfect life. And that's a very 70s and 80s and kind of like pre-millennial look at horror, where you have somebody who's living a perfect life and they've done nothing wrong, and something horrible comes after them, and that's sort of where the terror comes in. Whereas, like, you compare it to like Evil Dead, where Evil Dead, the original one's just a bunch of kids going to a cabin in the woods, they've really done nothing wrong, and this horrible stuff happens. Whereas the new Evil Dead, it's a broken family with a lot of problems and angst, and that helps manifest. And it's a different way of doing it in a modern age.
Yeah, and I liked Leslie Odom's role, the dad.
Yeah.
I like the fact that he kind of stands back. He's not a believer.
Yeah.
But his daughter is missing. He needs help from other people, and he knows where to go for the friends and the ultra Catholic family, father and mother. And I kind of like the way, perhaps if he's our surrogate, he's kind of standing back, trying to understand what's happening, and he doesn't want to believe, but when you see some of this stuff, how could you not somewhat believe?
Well, and that's kind of that's the transformation that Chris McNeil goes through in the original movie, because she starts off not really being particularly religious, and then she exhausts every avenue of medical and psychiatric science. And there's that wonderful scene where she's saying to Father Karras, "You tell me that an exorcism, I have nothing else to do," and she's at a breaking point. And that was so good. I don't think they hit on it as well with this one, but they mirrored that progression, which in a lot of ways this movie does follow the arc of the original, because this thing happens and these girls, and then there's this sort of slow descent, and then they start looking into an exorcism, but it's done in a very different way. So I respect that. I just don't think it made it happen properly.
No, and I think much less philosophy, much less religion in this one. Actually, the church has disavowed it anyway. They won't allow the priests to do the exorcism. So we're really, as I think you were pointing out earlier, we're really getting the Catholic Church out of this and giving it to the masses for them to take care of it, because they're not going to allow their priests to face it.
Well, back in the early 70s, or I forget when, I think Exorcist, the original book was in the 60s.
Okay, yeah.
You know, before that, exorcism was kind of a fringe thing. Nobody really knew what it was. And this brought it to popular light. Well, it's been around for 50 years, so everyone's like, can we get an exorcism? And it's him, the character, Leslie Odom's character, approaching this in a very different world than Chris McNeil, which was Ellen Burstyn in the first film. They're in very different worlds where the accessibility is very different.
Yeah, and I just like the fact that in separating themselves from the church, they begin to take responsibility, for instance, for their relationship with their teens.
Yeah.
And it begins to be as much a commentary about the difficulty of modern life with teenagers who are going to be almost like they're controlled by or possessed by some kind of an evil spirit. And so metaphorically, it works for me. It works better for me here.
Sure.
But that, you are right, that one in 1973, now I was old enough to thoroughly enjoy
Yeah.
that one. And we made it a pilgrimage to go to see The Exorcist.
Yeah.
And Kevin, it was powerful.
It still is.
And,
I
50
watched it
years
a couple-
later,
couple weeks
yes,
ago,
oh, did you? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, what is freaking do on that's nobody can seem to get near.
Well, part of it is, and this is a freaking thing, is a slow burn. It's in the Sorcerer is the same way. It starts out very mundane, and it builds and builds and builds, but the sense of dread's always there. The other thing is it works on multiple levels. It's when I was a kid, when I was a teenager and I saw it, I identified with Reagan and the trouble she went through. Now I identify with the mother because, I mean, the frustration and panic when something's obviously wrong with your child and you cannot get an answer is soul crushing. And I imagine, well, and I think when I was a younger man, I kind of identified with Father Karras, and then I'm sure at some point when I'm old, I'm getting there, but in about 20 years, I'll probably watch it again and identify with Father Marin at the end of his career.
And that's a great point. When I was growing up, of course, we were much more independent.
Mm-hmm.
We led lives that were not controlled by helicopter parents. So but now, as you're looking at how carefully parents try to watch their kids, and I don't blame them. There's so much danger out there, and there's so much freedom for kids in the sense of what they can be relative to social media and so on to each other. I think it's a dangerous world out there. It wasn't quite so when I was growing up.
There's always danger out there. What it is there's more avenues to get to your kids. It used to be you just say like, don't talk to strangers. Well, now it's don't talk to strangers online, don't talk to people who you think you
I know, yes.
There's a lot of that. And then on the flip side, it's so much easier to track your kids nowadays.
Yeah.
There's apps that'll track them and all that kind of thing. And that's why when they lose track of them for 3 days in this new movie, that's harrowing for them because it's very hard
right.
to do nowadays.
That's right. Kevin Carr, the movie is The Exorcist Believer. And we actually have more things to say. Kevin always has more things to say on our podcast, Double Take, which is coming up right after this. But right now, Kevin, what advice do you have for our audience?
Well, I was not a huge fan of this movie, so I don't think, if all you want is a throwaway exorcism movie, give it a shot. But if you're looking for something to reach the first one, or even the third one, which is probably definitely the best sequel they've done, you're not going to get it. So don't try to reinvent the genre here.
I'm John DeSando.
Classics, let's go to the movies and share some popcorn, soda pop with our friends. Turn off our cell phones.